Welcome back and thanks for staying with us. You're watching JKL, and on the bench is Professor Makau Mutua, the chairperson of the compensation committee that was put together by the head of state, as well as the advisor to the head of state on constitutional and human rights matters. Prof, many thanks for your time.
Thank you.
And much appreciated for your company here on the bench.
Absolutely.
All right. Yeah. So let's proceed with what we had earlier on. And in totality, what does this process intend to achieve?
So we have several, as outlined in the Gazette notice, but also in the proclamation. We are doing several things. As I said, number one, we are doing compensation for fatalities, for serious injuries, and also paying for hospital bills. So that is one aspect of this. The second aspect of this is making recommendations to the relevant state bodies, such as the legislature, to either pass new laws or amend existing laws to clarify, for example, the right to protest, to assemble, and to picket in Article 37. And then we should also be making recommendations, by the way, on how our law enforcement culture can be transformed, so that what we've seen over the last 2 years does not recur. And then finally, if evidence comes to us of criminal culpability, we shall make referrals for prosecutions. And
then, because largely this is revolving around the handling of demonstrations by state agencies.
Exactly correct.
What then, in your view, will become of the Independent Policing and Oversight Authority, the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, and Parliament?
I think that there is a mistaken understanding of, how states respond to events of this nature. There are several, sometimes overlapping, but different processes. So, for example, the judiciary deals with, on criminal matters, deals with cases that come before it to hold perpetrators accountable. There is also, obviously, the power vested within the executive by the Constitution in Article 131 and Article 132 and Article 29 of 21 of the Constitution for the President to respond to emergent questions that impinge on human rights questions. And it is those powers vested in the presidency under those clauses that the president has invoked in appointing our panel. Yeah. And I just want to say that, I've heard people argue that there is an attempt to usurp the powers, for example, of the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights or of IPOA. Nothing of the sort. In fact, all of those bodies, IPOA, Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, the National Police Service, all of them have nominated senior officials to sit on my panel, and we are working together in this panel.
Yeah, and one common denominator in all your op-eds and columns that you have written is the respect for the rule of law and constitutionalism.
Correct.
These bodies ideally had a distinct role, is it, under Katiba?
They have a distinct role, but they do not have an exclusive role.
Yeah, well, why wouldn't they be given the free will and be accorded the goodwill for them to undertake?
Abdulkader, there is no one, who has taken their mandate or responsibilities away. And the presidency or the executive cannot direct them about what they should do. The Kenya National Commission on Human Rights is an independent commission, as you know. It runs itself. It determines what it is going to address. IPOA does the same thing. But of their own volition, they have joined this process because they realize how important it is for us to respond expeditiously and quickly to the cries of the victims.
Yeah, and they are pigeonholed, is it, Prof, because of exogenous pressure from the executive. IPOA constantly decries underfunding in undertaking its mandate. The Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, taxpayer funded, the president disputed the numbers 6 days after Parliament was breached, saying that their figures were incorrect. Ideally then, and having talked about Parliament, as he did, accusing the House of corruption, the bicameral setup, these are institutions that ideally have not been granted the space to work, is it, by the executive?
I do not agree with you, Abdikader. I think that our parliament is very robust. I think it acts independently, quite often, without heeding any pressures from the outside. I think the issue that the president was addressing with respect to parliament was a question of corruption. And I think he pointed out, and rightly so, that in certain parliamentary committees, a lot of graft is going on. And that's a fact. And I think it is right for him to point it out, and it is now incumbent upon the leadership of the legislature to address these issues. So I think it is, I've talked about how in a democracy the system works. There's separation of powers, and there are three arms of government. The three arms of government are independent, but they are also interdependent. They work together. People do not understand that the judiciary, for example, is part of the state. So is the legislature. So all these arms of government must work together for things to happen in this country so that they can deliver for the people of this country. But I think there are people in this country who tend to read the Constitution as though it was a newspaper. The Constitution is not a newspaper. It is a very serious document. It has deep meaning. If you look at its clauses, what you are required to do is to read it holistically as one document. And so this idea of trying to segregate the three arms of government as though they should not work together is a mistaken reading of the Constitution.
Yeah. And Prof, you talked about the revival of the economies of those who have been affected.
Yes.
And compensation is seen as monetary in value,
yes,
as you have talked about.
Yes.
What then happens to the physical and the emotional scars for families that have lost their loved ones? Money aside, how exactly are they going to find closure?
Abdikader, let me just say this. And I want to speak directly to the victims, to their families, and to their loved ones. We can never bring your lost people back. It is not possible. But what we can do is to take that pain and try to respond in such a way that gives, first of all, economic meaning to your lives, and secondly, dignifies you as a victim or as a relative of a loved one. So that must be done. Beyond that, I think there are other aspects of what happened that has caused trauma. There's psychological issues that have arisen out of these demonstrations and clashes between law enforcement and citizens.
Yeah.
One of the things that we want to do is to recommend and to find psychological counseling to those who have been affected. I was listening yesterday, as I said, and the day before, I listen every day to victims. And one of the things that they're talking about, beyond compensation, is in fact counseling, because a lot of these people have been traumatized. And so we think that's important. I do not know whether it is possible for one to find closure for the loss of a loved one. But I think what is possible is for one to get to a point whereby they can realize that their country cares for them, because the way the country has responded to them dignifies them. And perhaps that will provide a sense of healing for the victims and their families.
Is that then an admission of guilt on the part of the state that it committed the atrocities?
I think there is no doubt, Abdikader, that terrible things happened in this country in 2024 and 2025. The kinds of scenes that we saw everywhere, as I said earlier, were dystopian. We saw citizens and law enforcement clash in ways that are not intended by our Constitution. This is regrettable. And I think all of us, some of us are fathers, others are brothers to people, and so on and so forth. When we see these activities taking place, we hurt for our fellow citizens. We hurt for them. And we are humans. All of us are humans. And so I just want to say, on behalf of everyone in this country, that we are all sorry about what happened. It's a fact, Abdikado. We are all sorry about what happened. You know, I think if you've lost a loved one, you know how difficult that is. So all of us are sorry about it. And the way we respond to that kind of trauma and that kind of loss is to show that we care as a country. You know, I think, you know, people have talked about that compensation should not be the first thing that we do. But you know very well, Abdikader, that one of the most important things to a victim is to try to make them whole again in terms of what they have lost, in terms of income, in terms of their place in the economy. And so the compensation that we are going to give will provide that. And I submit to you that that really is part of the justice matrix, to give someone something that can provide them a basis for getting up on their feet economically. It's very important.
What about accountability on the part of those who committed those atrocities?
I think investigations are being conducted as we speak. And as I said, you know, where evidence warrants, you know, we shall make referrals to the ODPP so that those individuals who committed those crimes can be brought to book. And by the way, it is not simply, we're not simply talking about those who perpetrated heinous acts against civilians. We are also talking about holding accountable civilians who attacked law enforcement. You know, we must be even-handed here because I think both sides suffered some losses. Admittedly, the civilian protesters suffered the most. That is not deniable. And where that happened and where the police used excessive force, and we have evidence about that, we shall be making referrals for prosecution.
Yeah, accountability because, for instance, you have no prosecutorial powers. That's why you are bringing in the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions.
Correct.
This then, therefore, assumes the perfect description of blood money.
I think that's a very cynical way of looking at what we are doing. You know, if you go through the court system, let us say, for example, a police officer uses excessive force against a person, a civilian, let's say, for example, in a demonstration. That police officer will be tried and convicted, all right? Mm-hmm. And probably sent to jail, okay? But there is also the possibility of a civil suit being filed against that same police officer and the government. Damages can be paid for a wrongful death because of the use of excessive force. When that happens, Abdikader, we don't call that blood money. We call that damages rightly rendered by the courts for a wrongful act by an official.
How then do you respond to the deep-seated public apprehension and the possibilities of this opening gates for budgeted killings in Kenya by successive governments?
Again, I think that this is cynicism. No. I think there are individuals who are trying to turn what we are doing into a political football. I just want to remind you that for the last 2 years, since these demos began, there has been a national consensus across the country that victims must be compensated. As you know very well, Azimio, for a long time, called for compensation. The Right Honorable Raila Odinga was, in fact, in the forefront of calling for compensation. If you look at the NADCO report itself, which was a bipartisan effort by all political parties, a reformist effort, it called for compensation. The so-called united opposition in this country has been calling for compensation every day. So it looks to me to be quite hypocritical that the same people who have been calling for compensation, especially in the united opposition, are now turning around to say that this effort is not genuine. What is the government supposed to do? the government is supposed to respond to the cries of its people. And the president, in establishing our panel, is rightfully responding to the cries of the people.
Yeah.
And I just want to say to our friends across the political aisle, this issue of compensation should not be a political football. It is not something to play with. And it is not something that should be used to score political points. You know, these are real people who have suffered. They have lost their loved ones. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to unite in making sure that we give them something meaningful, not just mere rhetoric in political rallies.
All right. Because if then this compensation should be extended, we look back at also the other times where Kenyans also were meted with violence on the part of the state.
Yes.
But this is a question from Professor Makau.
Yes, yes, yes.
The questions, he says, of compensating victims of police brutality, holding police accountable, and preventing recurrence through reforms are political questions that in a democracy such as ours require public debate and can never be resolved through presidential fiat. And you can see clearly that the head of state created the panel to avoid these difficult questions.
I think that with all due respect to my fellow professor and learned brother, Makau, I think he's reasoning there like a refusenik. A refusenik is a dissenter, you know, who is not willing to engage in looking for and getting practical solutions to a problem. Professor Akech knows very well that there have been many verdicts rendered in our courts over the years. Going back 20, 30 years, there's in the order of 450 billion shillings in verdicts, in pending bills, on some of these questions. They have never been paid, okay? What we are doing something that is rarely done in this country, something that is historic, something that is unprecedented. We are processing claims so that they can be paid out, so that we can respond to the people who need this help the most. So it seems to me that there are individuals, and Professor Akech is one of them, who simply want us as a country to be paralyzed, never to respond to any of these tragic events. What the president has done is to put his money where his mouth is, to respond to these tragic events that have happened since 2017. And I think rather than simply finding fault with everything that the government does in this country, folks like my friend, Professor Akech, should join us. In fact, I asked him when we were in Diani for the LSK conference, I asked him, I said, my brother, are you going to come and talk to our panel? And in fact, he promised to come and talk to our panel.
Okay.
So I do not know where this biliousness has come from. I'm still inviting him to come and talk to our panel.
He can still talk to the panel, but also reserve his well-documented differences as a champion of democracy.
Absolutely. Yeah. Dissent, of course, is a heartbeat of democracy, and I welcome it.
So here's another important question.
Yes.
Then what does this compensation process mean here, given that the affected families, are they going to be barred from suing the government for compensation? And what happens should the justice system return a guilty verdict on the part of the state?
So some of the questions that you are asking, of course, anticipate processes that my panel has not yet grappled with. We just began working this week. We are trying to establish a framework and the parameters for compensation and the standards that we are going to use for compensation, including issues of quantums and so on. So that question is going to be answered. But I think fundamentally what I want to emphasize is that we want to make sure as a panel that whatever we do constitutes a key part of justice for the victims, whatever we do. That's what I want our panel to do, and that's what we are going to do. I will come back here in a number of weeks to answer some of these questions that are now premature.
Okay. Yeah. So there's also the question we'll talk about after the break here, Prof.
Yes.
You're vice chairperson.
Yes.
The president of the Law Society of Kenya.
Correct.
And you're also a member of LSK.
Yes, myself, I'm not.
You're not a member?
I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not.
So we'll talk.
I'm a member of the bar in New York,
okay,
but not in Kenya.
Not in Kenya.
Yes.
But you understand the framework under which the section that establishes the Law Society of Kenya and how it works in coming up with a resolution.
Definitely.
Okay, so we'll talk about that.
Yes.
As well as, just to remind, this is for viewers as well. By the way, I read a lot about your op-eds, and here's what you said some time back.
Okay. I knew that you're going to come.
It's an accountability show now.
You're going to come up with a question out of left field.
Yeah.
But bring it on.
No, there are very many. Yes,
bring it on.
Somebody thinks I can work for William Ruto, and you put in brackets in that Daily Nation op-ed, excuse me, while you had laughed it off.
Yes.
Of that suggestion.
Yes.
So we'll talk more about that. I'm sure you recall those articles that you have published.
I recall them, but remember, an opinion columnist does not write the headline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. The details are there.
The details are there.
We'll talk about that.
We'll talk about it.
Okay.
Let's talk about it. Yes.
Thank you. Because we have a lot to talk about as well, including the role of the institutions of government and the clear blue waters between the arms of government in our constitutional architecture here in Kenya.
I welcome the discussion.
All that is with Professor Makau Mutua here on the bench after the break. He advises the President on the Constitution and human rights and chairs the panel that the head of state put together in order to compensate victims of demonstrations in the country. Stay tuned, you are watching JKL.